The echoes of gunfire had long faded from the plains of Wyoming Territory, but in Henry Daniels' mind, the war never truly ended. The spring of 1871 found him slouched against the bar at Sweetwater Saloon, his eyes as vacant as the faith that had once filled his heart. "Another," he growled, sliding his empty glass toward the barkeep. 3 years after returning from the bloodbath that was the Civil War, Henry still couldn't wash away the memories with whiskey, though God knows he tried. "Think you've had enough, Daniels," the barkeep said, not unkindly. "That's your fourth tonight." Henry's hand instinctively moved to the worn Bible tucked in his saddlebag. Once his most prized possession, now just deadweight he couldn't bring himself to discard, like the faith it represented. "I'll tell you when I've had enough," Henry muttered, though there wasn't much fire behind his words. At 32, his face already bore the weathered lines of a man who'd seen too much. The war had taken his youth, his brother, and the God he once served with unwavering devotion. The saloon doors swung open, bringing with them a gust of spring air that seemed out of place in the smoke-filled room. Henry didn't bother to turn around until he heard a woman's voice, clear and determined, cutting through the usual saloon noise. "I'm looking for someone to guide me to Stillwater Creek," she announced. "I'm willing to pay fairly," the barkeep chuckled. "Madam, Stillwater's rough country, no place for a lady traveling alone. Nevertheless, that's where I'm headed." The woman's voice held a quiet conviction that finally made Henry turn. She stood near the entrance, dressed simply but properly in a travel-worn blue dress. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her posture spoke of someone who knew her own mind. She looked to be in her mid-20s, with intelligent eyes that scanned the room with purpose rather than fear. "No one in their right mind goes to Stillwater these days," called out one of the card players. "Not since the Mitchell gang moved in." The woman didn't flinch. "I have business there that can't wait. My name is Katherine Ashford. I've come to establish a schoolhouse for the children in that region." Several men laughed outright. Henry took another swig of his drink, feeling the familiar burn. A schoolteacher heading into outlaw territory, she might as well paint a target on her back. "Miss Ashford," the barkeep said gently, "Stillwater ain't ready for civilizing just yet. The folk there are just trying to survive." "All the more reason those children need education," she replied firmly. "Now, who among you knows the trail well enough to guide me?" The room fell silent. Henry stared into his empty glass, feeling her gaze sweep over him like everyone else. He should mind his own business. He had enough demons to wrestle without taking on someone else's fool errand. "I'll pay $50, she added, and Henry's head came up despite himself. $50 could buy a lot of whiskey. "I know the way," he found himself saying, his voice rough from disuse, "but it'll cost you $75. Katherine Ashford studied him, her eyes taking in his trail-worn clothes, his unshaven face, the slight tremor in his hand that spoke of too much drink. "Are you reliable, Mr. Daniels, Henry Daniels?" He straightened slightly. "And I'm as reliable as anyone in this room." "I was a scout during the war." Something in his tone must have convinced her because she nodded briskly. "Very well, Mr. Daniels, when can we depart?" "Tomorrow dawn," he said, already regretting his impulsive offer. "Meet me at the livery. I'll be there." She turned to leave, then paused. "And Mr. Daniels, I expect you to be sober." After she left, the barkeep shook his head. "You're a fool, Henry. That woman's trouble." Henry stared at the door where Katherine had disappeared. "Wouldn't be the first time I've courted trouble." "She's one of them religious types," another patron added. "Saw her coming out of the church earlier praying up a storm." Henry's jaw tightened. As long as her money's good, she can pray to whoever she wants. That night, lying on his rented bed, Henry couldn't sleep. The thought of guiding a prim schoolteacher through dangerous territory seemed absurd, but he needed the money. His funds were running dangerously low, and taking odd jobs around town wasn't cutting it anymore. Dawn came too soon. Henry's head throbbed as he saddled his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Sergeant. The animal had been with him since the war, one of the few constants in his life. "At least one of us got some sleep," he muttered to the horse, who flicked his ears in response. Katherine Ashford arrived precisely on time, leading a loaded pack horse behind her own mare. She wore a practical riding outfit and had traded her formal bun for a simple braid. If she noticed Henry's bloodshot eyes, she didn't comment. "Good morning, Mr. Daniels. I trust we're ready to depart." Henry grunted in response, checking her saddle and gear with practiced efficiency. "Your mare looks strong enough, but this trail ain't for the faint-hearted. 3 days hard riding, assuming we don't run into trouble." "I'm no stranger to long journeys," she replied, "and I came prepared." She patted the rifle scabbard attached to her saddle. Henry raised an eyebrow. "You know how to use that? My father insisted all his children learn to defend themselves. I'm no sharpshooter, but I can hit what I aim at." There was something refreshing about her lack of pretension. Still, Henry remained skeptical as they rode out of town, the morning sun climbing higher in the sky. "What's in Stillwater that's worth risking your neck?" Henry asked after they'd been riding for an hour in relative silence. Katherine straightened in her saddle. "Children who deserve an education, families trying to build a life, the usual things people need in a frontier town." "You're either very brave or very naive," Henry remarked. "Stillwater's been taken over by Jed Mitchell and his boys. They don't take kindly to strangers bringing civilization." "I'm aware of the town's reputation," Katherine replied evenly, "but I made a promise to establish schools throughout this territory, and I intend to keep it." "A promise to who? Your husband?" "I'm not married, Mr. Daniels. My promise was to God and to myself." Henry fought the urge to roll his eyes. Of course she was the God-fearing type, just his luck. "Well, Miss Ashford, out here God's got a funny way of answering prayers, usually with silence." She studied him for a moment. "You sound like a man who's prayed and been disappointed." Henry's face hardened. "I don't pray anymore, not since Shiloh. You fought at Shiloh." Her voice softened slightly. "Fought, killed, watched good men die for nothing." Henry nudged Sargent into a faster trot. "Let's pick up the pace if we want to reach Miller's Creek by nightfall." They rode in silence for several hours, the landscape gradually changing from open prairie to rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising rain. "There's a line shack about 5 miles ahead," Henry called over his shoulder. "We'll stop there for the night." "I thought we were aiming for Miller's Creek." "That was before the weather turned. I don't fancy getting caught in a thunderstorm on open ground." The first fat raindrops began to fall as they approached the dilapidated structure. It was little more than a one-room cabin with a leaky roof, but it would provide shelter from the elements. "It's not much," Henry admitted as he helped Katherine dismount, "but it's better than being outside tonight." Katherine nodded, helping him unsaddle the horses and secure them in the lean-to attached to the cabin. By the time they brought their supplies inside, the rain was coming down in sheets. Henry busied himself building a small fire in the stone fireplace, while Katherine arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the cabin. The single room suddenly seemed very small for 2 strangers. "I have some jerky and hardtack," Henry offered, pulling supplies from his saddlebag. "And I have coffee and dried apples," Katherine added. "It's not a feast, but it will do." As they sat near the fire eating their simple meal, Henry found himself studying Katherine more carefully. Up close, he could see the light dusting of freckles across her nose and the determination in her hazel eyes. She was pretty in an understated way, with a quiet strength that reminded him of the women who had followed the army during the war, nurses and wives who had shown more courage than many of the men. "How long have you been teaching?" he asked, surprising himself with his interest. "Since I was 18, she replied, sipping her coffee. 8 years now. I started in Boston, but when my parents died last year, I felt called to bring education to the frontier." "Called?" Henry couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. Katherine met his gaze steadily. "Yes, Mr. Daniels." "Called by God. And does God tell you to walk into dangerous situations? Because that's what you're doing in Stillwater." "God doesn't promise safety, he promises purpose." Henry snorted. "I had purpose once, lot of good it did me or the men who died under my command." A flash of lightning illuminated the cabin, followed by a crash of thunder. In that brief moment, Katherine saw something in Henry's eyes, not just bitterness, but pain. "You were an officer," Henry nodded reluctantly. "Captain, 3rd Tennessee Infantry." Union side, which didn't make me popular back home. You fought for what you believed was right. I fought because I thought God was on our side. Henry tossed a stick into the fire, watching it catch. Then I held my dying brother in my arms at Shiloh. Jamie signed up because of me, followed me right into hell. He was praying when he died, praying while his blood soaked into my uniform. Katherine was silent for a long moment. I'm sorry about your brother. Sorry doesn't bring him back, neither does prayer. Henry reached for his saddlebag, pulling out a flask. Katherine watched him take a long swallow. Is that why you drink, to forget? I drink because it helps, he said simply, and because I've got nothing better to do with my life. I don't believe that. Katherine's voice was soft but firm. A man who risks his life to guide a stranger through dangerous territory isn't someone who's given up completely. Henry gave a humorless laugh. Don't mistake necessity for nobility, Miss Ashford. I took this job for the money, plain and simple. And yet you're making sure I reach my destination safely. You could have abandoned me or worse. The day I start robbing schoolteachers is the day I put a bullet in my head. Henry's voice was harsh. I may have lost my faith, but I still have some standards. Katherine studied him thoughtfully. You know, Mr. Daniels, faith isn't something you lose like a pocket watch. It's something that changes, evolves through hardship. Is that what you tell yourself when bad things happen to good people? When children die in their mother's arms or men are butchered by the thousands in senseless battles? No, she said quietly. In those moments, I don't try to explain God's ways. I simply hold on to the belief that there is meaning beyond what we can see. Henry shook his head. That's a comfort I can't afford anymore. Then let me pray till you believe, Katherine said suddenly, her eyes meeting his across the fire. The simple statement struck Henry like a physical blow. What did you say? Let me pray till you believe, she repeated. Not just today or tomorrow, but for as long as it takes. Let me carry that hope for both of us. For a moment, Henry couldn't speak. The earnestness in her face reminded him painfully of Jamie, of his own younger self who had believed so fervently. Save your prayers, Miss Ashford, he finally said, his voice rough. I'm beyond redemption. No one is beyond redemption, Mr. Daniels. No one. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, something subtle had shifted. Henry couldn't name it, didn't want to acknowledge it, but as he rolled into his blanket that night, Katherine's words echoed in his mind. Let me pray till you believe. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by nightmares of Shiloh that left him gasping in the darkness. Once he woke to find Katherine kneeling by her bedroll, her lips moving silently in prayer. The sight should have irritated him, but instead he found himself watching her, wondering what kind of faith could survive in a world so full of suffering. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world that smelled of wet earth and pine. They set out early, the trail muddier but navigable. We should reach Miller's Creek by midday, Henry said as they rode. We can resupply there before heading into the more isolated country. Is Miller's Creek safe? Katherine asked. Safer than Stillwater, at least. It's a mining town, rough around the edges but with some semblance of law. Henry adjusted his hat against the morning sun. The real danger starts after that. You mean the Mitchell gang? Henry nodded grimly. Jed Mitchell and his boys have been terrorizing this region for 2 years now. They've made Stillwater their personal kingdom. The last marshal who went in there came out in a pine box. Katherine's expression grew troubled. I had heard rumors, but I hoped they were exaggerated. If anything, the rumors don't do them justice. Henry glanced at her. It's not too late to turn back, you know. There are plenty of other towns that could use a schoolteacher. But not as desperately as Stillwater, Katherine replied firmly. Besides, I've already corresponded with several families there. They're expecting me. Henry frowned. You've been writing to folks in Stillwater. How? A traveling preacher delivered my letters. A Reverend Thomas Quinn. Henry's expression darkened. Quinn, old man with a white beard, rides a mule. Katherine nodded. You know him. I know he was found dead 3 weeks ago, about 10 miles outside of Stillwater. Henry watched her face pale. I'm sorry, Miss Ashford, I thought you knew. No, she whispered. I had no idea. What happened to him? Official reports said he was robbed, but folks who found him say it looked more like a message. His Bible was left open on his chest, pages torn out. Katherine's hands tightened on her reins. The Mitchell gang, most likely. They don't take kindly to anyone preaching civilized values in their territory. They rode in silence for several minutes, Katherine processing this disturbing news. If you want to turn back, Henry finally said, I'd understand. Katherine lifted her chin. No. If anything, this confirms how much Stillwater needs help. Reverend Quinn wouldn't want his death to be in vain. Henry studied her with new respect and growing concern. You're either the bravest or the most foolhardy woman I've ever met. Perhaps a bit of both, she admitted with a small smile. My father always said my determination would either be my greatest strength or my downfall. Let's hope it's the former, Henry muttered. Miller's Creek appeared before them just after noon, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a mining operation. The main street was muddy from the recent rain, but bustling with activity. Miners, merchants, and a few women of questionable reputation moved between the saloon, general store, and assay office. They drew curious glances as they rode in a rough-looking cowboy, and a proper lady made an unusual pair. Henry led them to the livery stable, where they arranged to rest and feed their horses. I need to pick up some supplies, Henry said as they walked toward the general store. We've got a hard 2 days ahead of us. The store owner, a portly man named Walsh, raised his eyebrows at Katherine's presence. Don't get many ladies like yourself passing through, madam. I'm on my way to Stillwater, Katherine explained. I'm establishing a school there. Walsh exchanged a look with Henry. Stillwater, you say? That's ambitious. So I've been told, Katherine replied evenly. While Henry gathered ammunition, jerky, and coffee, Katherine selected some paper and pencils. For my future students, she explained when she caught Henry watching her. As they were paying for their purchases, the door opened, admitting 3 rough-looking men. The atmosphere in the store instantly tensed. Well, look what we have here, said the tallest of the 3, a man with a pockmarked face and cold eyes. New faces in town. Henry subtly shifted his position, placing himself between Katherine and the newcomers. Just passing through, the man's gaze lingered on Katherine. Pretty lady you got there. Where you folks headed? North, Henry replied vaguely, his hand drifting toward his holstered pistol. The store owner cleared his throat nervously. These are some of Mr. Mitchell's associates. They come down from Stillwater regular-like for supplies. Henry felt Katherine stiffen beside him, but was impressed when her voice remained steady. Gentlemen. I'm Miss Ashford, the new schoolteacher for Stillwater. The announcement was met with surprised laughter from the 3 men. Schoolteacher. The pockmarked man grinned unpleasantly. Ain't heard nothing about no schoolteacher coming to Stillwater. Perhaps your employer isn't aware yet, Katherine replied coolly. I'll be happy to discuss it with him upon arrival. Henry fought the urge to clamp his hand over her mouth. The last thing they needed was for Mitchell's men to know exactly who she was and why she was coming. I'm sure the boss will be mighty interested to meet you, the man said, his eyes narrowing. Name's Carter, Tom Carter. These here are Bill and Levy. Henry nodded curtly. Henry Daniels. I'm escorting Miss Ashford. Recognition flickered in Carter's eyes. Daniels, the Union captain. Henry tensed. That was a long time ago. Not so long I don't remember, Carter spat. My brother died at Shiloh fighting you bluebellies. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Henry carefully calculated the distance to the door, weighing their options if this turned ugly. The war's over, Carter, Henry said quietly. Has been for years, not for everyone. Carter's hand hovered near his gun. Katherine stepped forward, seemingly oblivious to the danger. I'm very sorry about your brother, Mr. Carter. Too many good men died in that terrible conflict. Perhaps that's why education is so important, so future generations might find better ways to resolve their differences. Her sincere words seemed to catch Carter off guard. For a moment, confusion replaced hostility in his expression. We should be on our way, Henry said, gathering their purchases. Good day, gentlemen. As they stepped onto the boardwalk outside, Henry released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That was too close. And you, what were you thinking, announcing your intentions to Mitchell's men? Would you have preferred I lie? Katherine asked, genuinely puzzled. Yes, if it kept us alive. Henry ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Those men will ride ahead and warn Mitchell. We've lost any element of surprise we might have had. Catherine's expression grew thoughtful. Perhaps that's for the best. I have nothing to hide. I'm coming to teach children, not to challenge Mr. Mitchell's authority. You don't understand these types of men, Henry said grimly. Your very presence is a challenge because you represent law, order, civilization, everything they've rejected. They made their way to the town's small restaurant for a hot meal before continuing their journey. Throughout lunch, Henry remained tense, watching the door for any sign of Carter and his companions. They've gone, he finally said, probably riding back to Stillwater right now to tell Mitchell about us. What will he do? Katherine asked quietly. Henry pushed his plate away. Best case. He'll try to scare you off. Worst case. He left the sentence unfinished. We can't let fear dictate our actions, Katherine said after a moment. I still intend to reach Stillwater. I figured as much, Henry sighed, but we'll need to change our approach. We'll avoid the main trail and take the high ridge route. It's longer and rougher, but less likely to lead us into an ambush. As they prepared to leave town, the local sheriff approached them. He was an older man with a gray mustache and weary eyes. Heard you folks are heading to Stillwater, he said without preamble. Henry nodded cautiously. That's right. Then you should know what you're riding into. The sheriff glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. Mitchell's got about 15 men up there, all armed, all dangerous. They've killed 3 people in the last month alone. Katherine paled. 3 people. Who? The preacher was one. Then there was a miner who refused to pay protection money and a young woman who caught Carter's eye but wasn't interested in his advances. Henry watched Katherine's face, expecting her to finally show signs of reconsidering. Instead, her jaw set with even greater determination. Thank you for the warning, Sheriff, she said, but those people need help more than ever. The sheriff shook his head. You seem like a decent sort, madam. I'd hate to see you become the 4th victim. She won't, Henry said firmly. I'll make sure of that. After the sheriff walked away, Katherine turned to Henry with surprise. You still intend to take me there? I made a deal, Henry replied gruffly. Besides, if I don't take you, you'll just find someone else who might not be as careful. At least I know what we're up against. Something warm flickered in Katherine's eyes. Thank you, Mr. Daniels. Don't thank me yet, he muttered. We still have to get there alive. They left Miller's Creek by a back trail, Henry constantly scanning their surroundings for signs of trouble. The path he chose wound up into the foothills, a steep, narrow track that would be difficult for anyone attempting to follow them. By nightfall, they had reached a secluded plateau with a clear view of the valley below. Henry selected a campsite tucked against a rock formation, providing cover on 3 sides. No fire tonight, he said as they made camp. Can't risk the light being seen. Katherine nodded, pulling her coat tighter against the evening chill. They ate a cold supper of jerky and hardtack, washing it down with water from their canteens. As darkness settled around them, Henry took out his rifle and checked it methodically. I'll take first watch. You should get some sleep. I'm not sure I can, Katherine admitted, not after what the sheriff told us. Henry studied her in the fading light, having second thoughts about going to Stillwater. No, Katherine drew her knees up to her chest. But I am concerned about the danger I may be bringing to the very people I want to help. Henry hadn't considered that angle. The families who want you there, they must understand the risk. I hope so. Katherine was silent for a moment. Mr. Daniels, may I ask you something personal? Henry tensed but nodded. Before the war, before you lost your brother, what did faith mean to you? The question caught him off guard. For a moment he considered dismissing it, but something in Katherine's earnest expression made him answer honestly. Everything, he said quietly. It meant everything. My father was a preacher and I was following in his footsteps. I was studying theology when the war broke out. Katherine's eyes widened. You were going to be a minister. Hard to believe, isn't it? Henry gave a bitter laugh. I was so certain of God's plan then. So full of righteous purpose when I signed up to fight for the Union. I even carried recruits with scripture about justice and liberty. And then Shiloh happened. Henry nodded, his eyes distant. 2 days of slaughter like nothing I'd ever imagined. Men torn apart by artillery, drowning in their own blood, calling for mothers who couldn't hear them. Jamie took a mini-A ball to the chest, died slow, asking me why God had forsaken him. He swallowed hard. I didn't have an answer then, still don't. Katherine was quiet for a long moment. I won't pretend to understand your loss or to have easy answers for your questions. Most religious folks try to, Henry remarked. Then they do faith a disservice, Katherine replied. True faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about continuing the journey even when the path is dark and uncertain. Henry studied her face in the moonlight. And you've never questioned your path, never looked at the suffering in this world and wondered if your prayers were just words echoing in an empty sky. Of course I have. Katherine's voice was soft but steady. When my mother died of fever despite our prayers, when my father followed her just months later, when I've seen children beaten by parents who should protect them, I've questioned, I've doubted, I've raged. Yet you still believe, I do. She met his gaze unflinchingly. Not because it's easy or comfortable, but because in my darkest moments, faith is the only light I've found that doesn't extinguish. Her words stirred something in Henry that he'd thought long dead, not faith itself, but perhaps the memory of what faith had once felt like. Get some sleep, Miss Ashford, he said gruffly. We have a long ride tomorrow. Katherine nodded, unrolling her blanket. Good night, Mr. Daniels. And thank you for sharing your story with me. As she settled down to sleep, Henry kept watch, his thoughts more tumultuous than the peaceful night around them. Katherine's simple declaration, "Let me pray till you believe," kept returning to him. The arrogance of it should have angered him, yet instead he found himself almost envious of her certainty. The night passed uneventfully. When dawn broke, they packed quickly and continued their journey, following the ridgeline above the main trail. Henry estimated they were about a day's ride from Stillwater, assuming they encountered no trouble. Around midday, as they paused to rest the horses, Henry noticed dust rising from the valley trail below. Riders, he said, pulling out his field glasses. 5 of them heading toward Stillwater. Carter and his boys, plus 2 more I don't recognize. Katherine peered in the direction he was looking. Do you think they know we're up here? Don't think so. They're moving fast, not searching. Henry frowned. But they'll have men watching all approaches to Stillwater by now. What do we do? Henry considered their options. We keep to the high ground as long as possible. There's an old trapper's cabin about 3 hours from here where we can spend the night. Tomorrow, we'll approach Stillwater from the north through Pine Creek Canyon. It's the last place they'll expect us. Katherine nodded her agreement. As they mounted up to continue, Henry noticed her wincing slightly. You all right? He asked. Just saddle sore, she admitted with a small smile. I'm used to riding, but not for days at a stretch. Henry felt a pang of guilt. He'd been pushing hard, sometimes forgetting that Katherine wasn't a seasoned traveler like himself. We'll take it a bit easier this afternoon, he said. No point arriving in Stillwater if you can't walk when we get there. The trapper's cabin proved to be little more than a dilapidated shack, but its location tucked into a small grove of pine trees provided excellent concealment. Unlike the line shack, this cabin showed signs of occasional use, with a small woodpile and a crude stone fireplace. We can risk a small fire tonight, Henry decided. These trees will hide the smoke and we're far enough off the main trails. As Katherine gathered kindling, Henry tended to the horses, removing their saddles and rubbing them down. The animals were tired but holding up well. Inside the cabin, they found a rough wooden table, a 3-legged stool, and a platform that once served as a bed. Henry swept decades of dust from the floor while Katherine arranged their bedrolls. It's almost cozy, she remarked with gentle humor. Henry snorted. If your standards are low enough. My standards adjust to circumstances, Katherine replied, her smile warming something inside him. A skill that serves one well on the frontier. As darkness fell, they shared a more substantial meal than the previous night, supplemented with coffee heated over the small fire. The coffee's rich aroma filled the cabin, bringing with it an unexpected sense of comfort. Tell me about your students in Boston, Henry said, surprising himself with his interest. Katherine's face lit up. They were wonderful. Children from all walks of life, some wealthy, others desperately poor. I had 37 students in one room, ages 6 to 16. That sounds like chaos. It was, sometimes, she laughed. But there's nothing quite like seeing a child's face when they finally grasp a concept they've been struggling with. It's like watching a lamp being lit from within. Her enthusiasm was infectious. Henry found himself smiling despite his usual cynicism. "And you think you can accomplish the same thing in Stillwater?" "I have to try." Catherine's expression grew serious. "Education isn't just about reading and figures, Mr. Daniels. It's about showing children there are alternatives to violence and lawlessness. It's about giving them choices their parents might never have had." "That's a noble goal," Henry acknowledged, "but Mitchell and his men won't see it that way." "What do you think they'll do when we arrive?" Katherine asked quietly. Henry considered his answer carefully. "They'll try to intimidate you first, make threats, maybe damage your property. If that doesn't work—" He hesitated. "Go on," she urged. "They might try to harm you or harm those who support you." Henry met her gaze directly. "I won't lie to you, Miss Ashford. What you're attempting is dangerous. I understand that." Katherine studied the flames in the fireplace. "But I also believe that good people, when given support, can stand up to bullies. The families in Stillwater who contacted me, they're already taking a risk by wanting education for their children. They deserve someone willing to take risks alongside them." Henry was struck by her courage, not fearlessness, but a willingness to act despite her fears. It reminded him of the best officers he'd served with during the war, men who acknowledged danger but faced it anyway for a cause they believed in. "If you're determined to do this," he said slowly, "then you'll need more than just my escort to Stillwater. You'll need ongoing protection, at least until you establish yourself." Katherine looked at him in surprise. "Are you offering to stay?" The question hung in the air between them. Henry hadn't consciously formed that intention, yet he realized he couldn't simply deliver Katherine to Stillwater and ride away with a clean conscience. "I'm saying I'll help you get settled," he finally replied. "Make sure you have secure lodgings, meet the families who support you, assess the threat from Mitchell's men. After that, we'll see." Gratitude shone in Katherine's eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Daniels. That's more than I could have asked for." "Henry," he said suddenly, "if we're going to face danger together, you might as well call me Henry." "Henry," she repeated with a smile, "and I'm Katherine." Something shifted between them in that moment, a tentative bridge spanning the gulf of their different beliefs and experiences. As they prepared for sleep, Henry found himself watching Katherine as she knelt for her evening prayers. Her lips moved silently, her expression peaceful despite the perils awaiting them. "Do you pray for me?" he asked abruptly. Katherine looked up, not embarrassed to be caught in her devotions. "Every day since we met." "Why?" "Because I believe your soul is worth praying for," she said simply. "Because behind your bitterness, I see a good man who once knew God intimately and might find his way back." Henry wanted to scoff, to dismiss her assessment, but the sincerity in her eyes stopped him. "You're wasting your breath," he said instead, his voice lacking its usual edge. "Prayer is never wasted, Henry." Katherine rose and moved to her bedroll. "Even when the answer isn't what we expect." That night, as Katherine slept peacefully across the small cabin, Henry lay awake, his thoughts in turmoil. The woman's unwavering faith both irritated and fascinated him. How could someone so intelligent, so aware of the world's cruelties, still cling to beliefs that had failed him so completely? Yet there was something compelling about Katherine Ashford, not just her beauty, which he had increasingly come to appreciate, but her quiet strength and clear purpose. She walked toward danger not with blind faith but with eyes wide open, choosing courage over safety. Morning brought a light drizzle that promised to make their final approach to Stillwater both muddy and miserable. They ate a hasty breakfast and packed their gear, both aware that the most dangerous part of their journey lay ahead. "Pine Creek Canyon narrows considerably about halfway through," Henry explained as they rode. "It's the most likely place for an ambush, so we'll need to be alert." Katherine nodded, her face determined despite the rain soaking her hat and cloak. "How will we know if they've spotted us?" "Trust me, we'll know," Henry said grimly. "Mitchell's men aren't subtle." The canyon proved as treacherous as Henry remembered, a winding passage between steep rock walls that grew increasingly narrow. The recent rains had turned the trail muddy, forcing them to proceed at a careful pace. Every splash of water, Every loose stone skittering down the canyon walls made Henry tense. They were halfway through when Henry heard the unmistakable metallic click of a rifle hammer being cocked. He reacted instinctively, launching himself from his saddle toward Katherine, pulling her down from her horse just as gunfire erupted from above. "Stay down," he shouted, drawing his pistol as bullets kicked up mud around them. The horses bolted in panic, disappearing around a bend in the canyon. Katherine pressed herself against the canyon wall, her face pale but composed. "How many?" she whispered. "At least 2 shooters," Henry replied, scanning the rim of the canyon. "Up there, behind those boulders," a voice called down from above. "That's far enough, folks. This here's your last warning. Turn around and ride out while you still can." Henry recognized the voice Carter. "We've lost the horses," Katherine said quietly. "We can't turn back even if we wanted to." Henry grimaced. "They know that. They're just playing with us before they finish the job." "What do we do?" Henry assessed their precarious position. They had some cover from the canyon wall, but they were effectively trapped. The shooters above had the advantage of height and position. "Carter," Henry called out, "we're not looking for trouble." "The lady's a schoolteacher, coming at the request of families in Stillwater." Laughter echoed down the canyon. "Oh, we know exactly who she is. Boss says Stillwater don't need no schoolteacher filling kids' heads with nonsense." Katherine touched Henry's arm. "Let me try." Before he could stop her, she raised her voice. "Mr. Carter, I understand your employer's concerns. I only want to help the children of your community. Surely education can't be seen as a threat." There was a moment of silence then. "Nice try, lady, but orders are orders. Either you turn back or you don't leave this canyon alive." "They're not going to negotiate," Henry murmured. "Our only hope is to work our way forward, using whatever cover we can find." Katherine nodded grimly. "Lead the way." They began a painstaking advance through the canyon, darting from boulder to boulder, using every scrap of cover available. Occasional shots rang out, keeping them pinned down for minutes at a time before they could move again. "They're toying with us," Henry growled after a particularly close call. "If they wanted us dead, they could have done it already." "Perhaps they're reluctant to kill a woman," Katherine suggested, "or they're waiting for reinforcements," Henry countered. "Either way, we need to keep moving." They had progressed perhaps 100 yards when disaster struck. As Katherine darted to a new position, her foot slipped on the muddy ground. She fell hard, crying out in pain as her ankle twisted beneath her. Henry rushed to her side, dragging her behind a boulder as bullets peppered the ground around them. "How bad?" Katherine's face was white with pain. "I don't think it's broken, but I can't put weight on it." More laughter echoed from above. "Getting tired down there." "Why don't you make it easy on yourselves and surrender?" Henry's mind raced. Their situation, already desperate, had become nearly hopeless. Katherine couldn't run, and he couldn't carry her through the gunfire. "I'll create a diversion," he said suddenly. "Draw their fire while you crawl ahead to that fallen tree. It should provide better cover." "And then what?" Katherine asked, her eyes reflecting the gravity of their situation. "Then I'll try to circle back and get behind them." It was a desperate plan with little chance of success, but Henry saw no alternatives. Katherine grasped his arm. "It's suicide, Henry." "Maybe," he admitted, "but if I can take out even one of them, it might give you a chance." Katherine shook her head firmly. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me. This isn't open for debate." Henry checked his pistol, mentally counting his remaining ammunition. "On my signal, start moving toward that tree." Before he could move, Katherine closed her eyes briefly, her lips moving in silent prayer. When she opened them, her gaze was steady. "God will protect us both." Henry didn't have the heart to contradict her. "Ready. Now," he broke cover, firing rapidly at the canyon rim while zigzagging across open ground. Bullets kicked up dirt at his feet as he dove behind a small outcropping of rock. From the corner of his eye, he saw Katherine dragging herself toward the fallen tree. The shooters concentrated their fire on Henry, which was exactly what he'd intended. He fired back, more to keep their heads down than with any real hope of hitting them at that distance. Just as Katherine reached the relative safety of the tree trunk, Henry heard something that made his blood run cold: the sound of horses approaching from deeper in the canyon. Reinforcements had arrived, cutting off their potential escape route. "Henry," Katherine called out in warning. He saw them 2-3 riders emerging from around the bend, rifles ready. They had walked straight into Mitchell's trap, and now they were surrounded. "Looks like we got them cornered, boys," one of the newcomers shouted up to the rim. Henry met Catherine's gaze across the 30 feet that separated them. Her face was calm, almost serene, despite their dire circumstances. He couldn't understand her composure in the face of almost certain death. Then, to Henry's astonishment, she began to pray not silently, but out loud, her clear voice carrying through the canyon. "Heavenly Father, protect us in this hour of need. Shield us from those who wish us harm, and if it be your will, grant us safe passage to complete the task you have set before us." "Shut up, lady," Carter shouted from above, but Katherine continued undeterred. "And Lord, if this is to be our final hour, receive our souls with mercy and forgive those who act against us, for they know not what they do." Something strange happened then. The gunfire, which had been sporadic, ceased entirely. In the sudden silence, Catherine's voice seemed to grow stronger. "In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, who taught us to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us, Amen." Henry stared at her in disbelief. Had she lost her mind, or was this some bizarre negotiating tactic? One of the riders moved his horse forward cautiously. "That's enough praying, madam. Boss wants to see you both. On your feet, hands where we can see them." Henry weighed their options and found none. With shooters above and armed men in front of them, resistance meant certain death. Slowly he stood, keeping his hands visible. "The lady's hurt her ankle," he called out. "She can't walk." The lead rider considered this. "Carter, get down here. You can take the woman on your horse." Minutes later, they were disarmed and mounted, Katherine riding double with Carter, Henry with his hands tied to his saddle horn. The shooters from the rim joined them, and the entire party continued through the canyon toward Stillwater. "You're making a mistake," Henry said to the leader. "The lady's just a schoolteacher." "Save it for the boss," the man replied. "Mr. Mitchell will decide what to do with you both." Katherine caught Henry's eye, her expression conveying both apology and resolve. Despite their capture, she didn't appear frightened, concerned, yes, but not terrified as most people would be in their situation. The town of Stillwater came into view as they emerged from the canyon, a collection of rough buildings strung along a muddy main street. Unlike typical frontier towns, Stillwater had a besieged quality, with few people visible despite the mid-morning hour. Those residents who were outside hurried about their business, eyes downcast, avoiding the approaching riders. They were taken directly to the largest building in town, a 2-story structure that had once been a hotel, but now served as Mitchell's headquarters. A weathered sign reading "Stillwater Inn" hung crookedly above the door. Inside, the former lobby had been converted into something between a saloon and a throne room. Men lounged at tables, playing cards or drinking, while a massive desk dominated the far end of the room. Behind it sat a man Henry instantly recognized as Jed Mitchell. Mitchell wasn't what many expected from an outlaw leader. He was in his 40s, well-dressed in a black suit, with neatly trimmed hair and a scholarly appearance enhanced by wire-rimmed spectacles. Only his cold, evaluating eyes revealed the ruthlessness that had allowed him to build his criminal empire. "Mr. Mitchell," Carter announced, "we intercepted them in the canyon, just like you said we would." Mitchell rose from his desk, studying his captives with clinical interest. "Miss Katherine Ashford, I presume, and Captain Henry Daniels. You're both a long way from where you belong." Henry stiffened at the use of his military rank. Mitchell clearly had sources of information beyond just Carter's report. "Mr. Mitchell," Katherine said with remarkable composure, "I've come to Stillwater at the request of several families who wish education for their children. I mean no harm to you or your interests." Mitchell circled his desk, approaching Katherine with the air of a professor examining a curious specimen. "Education, such a noble pursuit." His voice dripped with sarcasm. "And tell me, Miss Ashford, what exactly would you teach these children? Obedience to law, respect for authority." "The evils of men like me. I would teach them reading, writing, arithmetic," Katherine replied calmly. "Knowledge that could improve their lives and the future of this community." "Knowledge is dangerous, Miss Ashford," Mitchell said softly. "It gives people ideas." makes them question arrangements that work perfectly well as they are. Henry watched the exchange with growing tension. Despite her injury and their precarious situation, Katherine showed no sign of backing down. "Knowledge is only dangerous to those who profit from ignorance, Mr. Mitchell," she replied. A murmur ran through the room. No one spoke to Mitchell that way, especially not a woman. Henry braced himself for an explosion of violence, but to his surprise, Mitchell laughed. "You have spirit, I'll grant you that." Mitchell returned to his desk. "Unfortunately, spirit isn't enough to change my decision. Stillwater doesn't need a schoolteacher. The children here learn everything they need from their parents and from life itself." "The parents who requested my presence disagree," Katherine countered. Mitchell's expression hardened. "Ah yes, your mysterious supporters. Would you like to meet them?" He nodded to one of his men. "Bring them in." Two frightened-looking couples were ushered into the room, their eyes downcast, bodies tense with fear. One of the women had a bruised cheek, one of the men had his arm in a crude sling. "These are the people who wrote to you, Miss Ashford," Mitchell said. "The Porters and the Hendersons." "Go ahead, tell the schoolteacher what you told me." The older man looked up, his expression agonized. "We're sorry, madam, we made a mistake. Stillwater don't need no school." Katherine's face fell as she realized what had happened. "They're afraid, Mr. Mitchell. What did you do to them?" "I merely helped them reconsider their priorities," Mitchell replied smoothly. "You see, Miss Ashford, my men and I provide protection for this community. In exchange, the good people of Stillwater understand that certain decisions require my approval." "You mean you terrorize them?" Henry interjected, unable to remain silent any longer. Mitchell turned his attention to Henry. "Captain Daniels, the war hero turned drunkard, tell me, what is your interest in this educational crusade, or are you merely the hired gun?" "I'm making sure the lady reaches her destination safely," Henry replied, meeting Mitchell's gaze steadily. "A job I apparently failed at. On the contrary, she reached Stillwater." Mitchell smiled coldly. "Whether she leaves alive is the question now before us." At this blunt threat, Katherine showed her first sign of fear, a slight widening of her eyes, quickly controlled. "Kill me if you must," she said quietly, "but it won't stop others from coming. Communities grow, children need education, and civilization will reach Stillwater whether you wish it or not." Mitchell studied her thoughtfully. "Perhaps, but not today and not through you." He turned to his men. "Take them to the storehouse. I need time to consider their fate." As they were led out, Henry caught a glimpse of the townspeople Mitchell had brought in, their faces etched with shame and fear. He understood their capitulation. Few had the courage to stand against such systematic brutality. The storehouse proved to be a sturdy building behind the hotel, used to warehouse Mitchell's ill-gotten goods. They were pushed inside and the door locked behind them. Once alone, Henry hurried to Katherine's side. "Let me see that ankle." She winced as he gently examined the injury. The ankle was swollen and beginning to bruise, but as she had guessed, it didn't appear broken. "We need to wrap this," Henry said, tearing a strip from his shirt. "Henry," Katherine said softly, "I'm sorry I got you into this." He looked up, surprised by her apology. "You didn't force me to come. I knew the risks. Still, you're here because of me." She paused as he carefully bound her ankle. "What do you think Mitchell will do?" Henry worked in silence for a moment. "He can't let us go. We've seen too much, know too much about his operation." "Then we're going to die," Katherine said with remarkable calm. "Maybe." Henry finished with her ankle and sat back. "But I'm not ready to accept that just yet." Katherine studied his face. "You have a plan, the beginning of one." Henry moved to the storehouse's single window, too small to escape through, but offering a view of the town's main street. "Mitchell runs a tight operation, but he's not as smart as he thinks he is." "What do you mean?" "He should have separated us," Henry explained. "Together, we have better odds of escaping, and he should have had us searched more thoroughly." Henry reached into his boot and pulled out a small knife he always kept hidden there. Katherine's eyes widened. "That's hardly enough against his small army. It's a start." Henry began examining the storehouse door. "More importantly, I noticed something while we were being brought through town. Not everyone here is happy with Mitchell's rule. I saw anger in some eyes, not just fear." "The families who wrote to me," Katherine said with renewed hope, "and others." "Mitchell's made enemies." We just need to find a way to reach them." As night fell, they could hear the sounds of revelry from the Hotel Mitchell's men celebrating another day of unchallenged power. Henry worked methodically at the door hinges, trying to loosen them without making noise. Katherine sat against the wall, her injured ankle stretched before her. Despite their dire situation, her composure remained remarkable. "You're surprisingly calm for someone facing death," Henry observed. Katherine offered a small smile. "I'm frightened, of course. But I've made my peace with God. Whatever happens, I know where my soul will rest." Henry paused in his work. "That kind of certainty, I used to have it once." "You could again," Katherine said gently. Henry shook his head. "Too much has happened, too much blood, too many prayers unanswered." "God always answers prayers, Henry. Sometimes the answer is no, or not yet, or I have something different in mind." Katherine's voice was soft in the dimness. "Your brother's death was a tragedy, but it doesn't mean God abandoned you. Then why did it happen?" The question erupted from Henry with unexpected force. "Jamie was a better man than me in every way. He believed with his whole heart. If God cared, why did he let Jamie die in agony while I lived on?" "I don't know," Katherine admitted. "I can't explain why some die while others live. No one can. But I do know that your survival wasn't a punishment or a mistake." Henry turned back to the door, working with renewed intensity. "Let's focus on getting out of here." They fell silent as footsteps approached the storehouse. Henry quickly concealed his knife as the door opened, revealing Carter and another of Mitchell's men. Carter held a lantern while his companion carried a tray of food. "Boss says to feed you," Carter announced. "No sense in you dying hungry." The implication wasn't lost on either captive. Henry tensed, preparing to use his hidden knife if an opportunity presented itself. Carter seemed to read his thoughts. "Don't try anything stupid, Captain. Even if you take us out, there's 20 more where we came from." The food, beans, bread, and coffee was placed on the floor. As the men turned to leave, Katherine spoke up. "Mr. Carter, may I ask a question?" Carter paused, suspicious. "What? The families in town, the ones with children. Do you have children yourself?" The question clearly caught Carter off guard. "What's that got to do with anything?" "I'm simply trying to understand this town," Katherine replied. "To understand you." Carter shifted uncomfortably. "I got a boy, 7 years old. And wouldn't you want him to learn to read, to have opportunities you perhaps didn't have?" Carter's expression darkened. "My boy learns what he needs from me. Now shut up and eat your food." He slammed the door, the lock clicking into place. Henry looked at Katherine with new respect. "You're trying to create allies." "I'm trying to remind them they're human," she corrected. "Even Mr. Mitchell was a child once, with dreams and potential." "Mitchell's beyond reaching," Henry said firmly. "But Carter, maybe." He resumed his work on the door hinges. "Eat something, you'll need your strength." They shared the simple meal, both aware it might be their last. As they ate, Katherine told Henry about her childhood in Boston, her parents' dedication to education, and her own journey to faith. "My father was a professor," she explained. "He believed knowledge and faith could coexist, that one enhanced the other rather than contradicting it." "My father believed the same," Henry admitted. "He used to say that God gave us minds to use them, not to abandon reason in the name of blind faith." "He sounds like a wise man." He was. Henry hadn't spoken of his family in years. The memories were both painful and strangely comforting. "He died before the war, thankfully. Never had to see what it did to his sons." As the night deepened, Henry finally managed to loosen one hinge enough to create a gap. "If I can get the bottom one as well, we might be able to squeeze out." "And then what?" Katherine asked practically. "Then we find allies." Henry worked methodically at the second hinge. "The preacher who was killed, he must have had friends in town, people who shared his beliefs." "The church," Katherine said suddenly. "Is there a church building?" Henry nodded. "I saw a small one at the end of the street." "Looked abandoned." "Perhaps not entirely," Katherine suggested. "If there are people in town who wanted education for their children, there may be those who still pray in secret." The second hinge gave way just as the first light of dawn began to filter through the small window. Henry eased the door open just enough to peer outside. The town was still quiet, with only a single guard visible, dozing in a chair outside the hotel. "We need to move quickly and quietly," Henry whispered. "Can you walk?" Katherine tested her injured ankle. With help, yes. Henry wrapped an arm around her waist, supporting her weight as they slipped out of the storehouse. They kept to the shadows, moving behind buildings rather than risking the open street. The church is that way, Henry murmured, indicating the far end of town. They had covered perhaps half the distance when a door opened unexpectedly, spilling light across their path. Henry froze, pulling Katherine deeper into the shadows. A woman stepped out, emptying a bucket of water before turning to go back inside. Her gaze swept the darkness and stopped, fixing on their hiding place. "Who's there?" she called softly. Henry tensed, ready to run or fight, but Katherine placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Please," Katherine said quietly, "we mean no harm. I'm the schoolteacher who was captured yesterday." The woman hesitated, then beckoned urgently. Inside, quickly, before someone sees you, they followed her into what proved to be a small bakery. The woman, middle-aged with graying hair and careworn features, locked the door behind them. "I'm Martha Henderson," she said. "You met my husband yesterday in Mitchell's place." "The man with the injured arm," Katherine recalled. "They forced you to reject me." Martha nodded, her expression pained. "We had no choice. Mitchell's men broke James's arm when they found out we'd written to you. Said the next time it would be our daughter's neck." "We understand," Henry assured her. "No one could expect you to risk your family, but I'm ashamed nonetheless." Martha gestured for Katherine to sit, examining her swollen ankle. "You need a doctor." "What we need is help getting out of town," Henry replied. "Mitchell plans to kill us." Martha's face hardened with resolve. "Not if we can help it. There are those of us in Stillwater who have had enough of Mitchell's tyranny." "How many?" Henry asked. "Enough," Martha replied cryptically. "Let me tend to Miss Ashford's ankle, then I'll take you somewhere safe." As Martha wrapped Katherine's injury with proper bandages, she explained in hushed tones that a small resistance had been forming in Stillwater. Reverend Quinn had been part of it before his murder. "His death was the final straw for many of us," Martha said. "We've been gathering weapons, making plans. We just needed the right moment." "And you think this is it?" Henry asked skeptically. Martha met his gaze steadily. "Two outsiders breaking free from Mitchell's grasp." "Yes, Captain Daniels, this could be exactly what we need to finally take a stand." Dawn was breaking in earnest as Martha led them through a series of back alleys to the abandoned church. Inside, they found not emptiness but a gathering of determined townspeople, perhaps 15 men and women, including Martha's husband James. "These are the ones Mitchell captured," Martha announced. "They've escaped." James Henderson stepped forward, his broken arm in a proper sling now. "Captain Daniels, Miss Ashford, we owe you an apology for our behavior yesterday." "No apologies needed," Katherine assured him. "You did what you had to do to protect your family." Henry surveyed the gathered townspeople. Most were ordinary folks, farmers, shopkeepers, tradesmen, but all shared the same resolute expression. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked. "Since Mitchell killed the first miner who stood up to him, about a year ago," James replied. "But it gained momentum after Reverend Quinn's murder. He was helping us organize." "What exactly are you planning?" Katherine inquired. A burly blacksmith spoke up. "To drive Mitchell and his men out of Stillwater once and for all." Henry assessed the group with a soldier's eye. They were determined but mostly untrained. "Mitchell has at least 20 men, all armed and experienced fighters. What do you have?" 18 of us willing to fight," James said. "Hunting rifles, a few pistols, the element of surprise, and now we have you a military man with combat experience." Henry felt the weight of their expectation. "I'm not the man I once was," he warned. "I haven't commanded men in battle for years." "But you know strategy," the blacksmith insisted, "and you've faced worse odds than this." Katherine touched Henry's arm gently. "These people need your help, Henry. They need the leader you once were." Henry looked into her eyes and saw not blind faith, but clear-eyed hope. In that moment, something long dormant stirred within him, a sense of purpose he'd thought lost forever. "All right," he said finally. "But if we do this, we do it smart. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. Mitchell's men won't hesitate to kill anyone who opposes them." For the next hour, Henry laid out a plan. The element of surprise was their greatest advantage, along with knowledge of the town itself. They would strike at noon when many of Mitchell's men would be sleeping off the previous night's drinking. Our primary target is Mitchell himself, Henry explained. Without him, his men will lose direction. Some will fight, but many will likely flee rather than die for a lost cause. As the townspeople dispersed to prepare, Katherine drew Henry aside. "You're in your element," she observed. "This is the man you were meant to be." Henry shook his head. "I was meant to be a preacher, not a warrior." "Perhaps God had a different plan," Katherine suggested gently. "Perhaps he preserved you through the war for this moment to help these people free themselves from tyranny." Henry had no answer for that. The idea that his survival, his suffering might have purpose was both comforting and disturbing. As noon approached, tension mounted in the small church where Henry and the core group had established their base. The townspeople had been divided into 3 teams, one to secure the rear of the hotel, one to cover the main street, and one, led by Henry, to confront Mitchell directly. Katherine, despite her injury, had insisted on being part of the operation. "I'll stay in the church," she promised. "We're converting it to a temporary hospital in case there are wounded." Henry nodded, relieved she wouldn't be in the direct line of fire. "If anything goes wrong, if Mitchell's men gain the upper hand, promise me you'll hide. Get out of town if you can." "I promise to be careful," Katherine replied, which wasn't quite the same thing, "but I have faith this will succeed." Henry checked his borrowed pistol one last time. "Faith isn't enough against bullets." "No," Katherine agreed, "but it gives courage to those holding the guns." She hesitated, then reached out to touch his face gently. "Be careful, Henry, I've grown rather fond of you." The simple statement caught him off guard. In the intensity of their situation, he had pushed aside his growing feelings for Katherine. Now, faced with the possibility that he might not return, those feelings surged to the surface. "I'll come back," he promised. "We have unfinished business, you and I," Katherine smiled. "Yes, we do." "I'm still praying till you believe, remember." Henry found himself returning her smile. "How could I forget?" The church bell struck noon. Across Stillwater, the resistance groups moved into position. Henry led his team, James Henderson, the blacksmith, and 3 other men toward the hotel. They moved openly down the street, no longer hiding. If their plan was to work, they needed Mitchell to know he was being challenged. As expected, a guard spotted them and shouted an alarm. Mitchell himself appeared on the hotel porch, flanked by Carter and several other men. "Daniels." Mitchell called, genuine surprise in his voice. "How did you? Never mind, this little escape changes nothing." Henry stood in the middle of the street, the townsmen fanning out beside him. "It's over, Mitchell. The people of Stillwater are taking back their town." Mitchell laughed. "With what?" "5 men and a schoolteacher." "Look around you," Henry replied calmly. Mitchell did, his confidence faltering as he noticed armed townspeople positioned on rooftops, in doorways, and at both ends of the street. His men were exchanging uneasy glances, clearly unprepared for organized resistance. "You're still outnumbered," Mitchell said, though with less certainty. "Maybe," Henry acknowledged, "but we're fighting for our homes, our families, our future. What are your men fighting for? Your greed." Carter shifted nervously beside Mitchell, his eyes scanning the determined faces of the townspeople. Henry could see doubt creeping into his expression. Mitchell noticed it too. "Stand firm, you cowards. They're just farmers with pitchforks." "No, Mitchell," Henry countered. "They're citizens reclaiming their town. Your reign ends today either by your surrender or your death. The choice is yours." For a moment, the tableau held Mitchell and his men on the porch, the townspeople in their positions, Henry and his group in the street. The tension was palpable, like the air before a lightning strike. Then Mitchell made his choice. With a curse, he drew his pistol and fired at Henry. The shot went wide and chaos erupted. Gunfire exploded from all directions as the townspeople and Mitchell's gang engaged. Henry dove for cover behind a water trough, returning fire methodically. The blacksmith went down with a shoulder wound but continued shooting from a prone position. 2 of Mitchell's men fell in the first volley. Through the smoke and confusion, Henry kept his focus on Mitchell. The outlaw leader had retreated into the hotel, firing from a window. Carter remained on the porch, exchanging shots with James Henderson. "Cover me," Henry shouted to his men. Keeping low, he sprinted to the side of the hotel, looking for another way in. Inside the church, Katherine heard the gunfire erupt and closed her eyes briefly in prayer. Martha Henderson and several other women had prepared bandages and medicines, ready to treat the injured. "It started," Martha said grimly. "God be with them." "He is," Katherine assured her, though her heart pounded with fear for Henry. In the short time they'd known each other, he had become incredibly important to her. More than a guide, more than a protector, a man whose wounded soul called to something deep within her own. The church door burst open, and two men carried in the wounded blacksmith. "Shot in the shoulder," one explained. "He's losing blood fast." Katherine pushed aside her worries and focused on the immediate need. As she helped tend the blacksmith's wound, more injured began to arrive, mostly Mitchell's men, being brought in under guard. "What's happening out there?" she asked one of the guards. "Mitchell's holed up in the hotel with about 5 men," the man reported. "The rest have surrendered or fled. The captain's leading a group to flush them out." Katherine's heart clenched with renewed fear. Mitchell, cornered, would be at his most dangerous. Henry had managed to enter the hotel through a back door, leading James and 2 other townsmen. They moved cautiously through the kitchen and into the main room, where overturned tables provided cover for Mitchell's remaining loyalists. "Give it up, Mitchell," Henry called out. "Most of your men have already surrendered. Come and get me, Captain." Mitchell shouted back, his voice edged with desperation. Gunfire erupted from behind an overturned bar. One of the townsmen cried out, clutching his leg as he fell. Henry signaled to James to drag the wounded man to safety while he provided covering fire. The exchange continued for several tense minutes, neither side able to gain an advantage. Henry was acutely aware that they were running low on ammunition. If they couldn't end this soon, Mitchell might be able to slip away in the confusion. Then Henry heard something unexpected, Carter's voice, not from behind the bar with Mitchell, but from near the staircase. "Boss, this is madness. We're surrounded, outnumbered. Shut up and keep firing," Mitchell snapped. "No," Carter's voice was firm. "I got a boy to think about. I'm done." Henry saw Carter stand, hands raised. "I'm coming out. Don't shoot." Mitchell's response was immediate and brutal, a single shot that caught Carter in the back. The man crumpled to the floor with a cry of pain. The cold-blooded attack on his own lieutenant seemed to break something in the room. 2 more of Mitchell's men stood, hands raised in surrender. "Don't shoot. We give up." Mitchell, now alone, continued firing wildly. "Cowards, traitors." Henry signaled to the remaining townsmen with him to cover the surrendering outlaws while he circled toward Mitchell's position. He moved carefully from table to table, closing in on the bar. A sudden silence fell as Mitchell's gun clicked empty. Henry rose, his own pistol trained on the space behind the bar. "It's over, Mitchell. Stand up slowly." Mitchell rose, his pristine suit now dirty and torn, blood from a scalp wound trickling down his face. His eyes burned with hatred and something else, fear. "You think this changes anything?" Mitchell spat. "Men like me will always exist. You can't civilize the frontier with schoolbooks and prayers." "Maybe not," Henry acknowledged, keeping his pistol steady. "But today, the good people of Stillwater are taking a stand. Whatever happens next, they've found their courage." Mitchell's hand moved suddenly, reaching for something in his coat. Henry didn't hesitate, his pistol barked once, and Mitchell staggered backward, a look of surprise crossing his face before he collapsed. In the sudden silence, Henry became aware of shouts from outside, not of battle, but of victory. The townspeople had reclaimed their community. Henry secured Mitchell's weapon, a small derringer he'd kept hidden, before checking the man's pulse. Finding none, he moved to Carter, who lay gasping on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. "Hold on," Henry told him, applying pressure to the wound. "We'll get you to the church." Carter gripped Henry's arm with surprising strength. "My boy," he wheezed. "Promise you'll look after my boy." "You'll look after him yourself," Henry insisted, though the severity of the wound told a different story. Carter shook his head weakly. "Tell the schoolteacher. Tell her she was right. Kids deserve better." His eyes closed as he lost consciousness. With Mitchell dead and his remaining men surrendered, the battle for Stillwater was over. The cost had been high: 3 townspeople killed, several more wounded, along with most of Mitchell's gang either dead or captured. Henry supervised the treatment of the wounded and the securing of prisoners before finally making his way to the church. The simple building had been transformed into a hospital, with the injured laid out in pews. Katherine moved among them, helping Martha and the other women tend to wounds. She looked up as Henry entered, relief flooding her face. Limping to him, she grasped his hands. "Thank God you're safe." Henry was suddenly aware of how filthy and blood-spattered he must appear. "Not all mine," he assured her, nodding toward the blood on his shirt. "Mitchell's dead." "Most of his men have surrendered or fled," Katherine asked. "I heard he tried to surrender." Henry shook his head grimly. "Mitchell shot him for it. He's over there." He nodded toward a corner where Carter lay, pale and still. "The doctor doesn't think he'll make it through the night." Katherine squeezed Henry's hand. "You should rest. You've done enough for today." "We all have," Henry replied, looking around at the townspeople who had fought to reclaim their home. In their faces, he saw exhaustion but also pride and determination. As darkness fell over Stillwater, an unusual peace settled on the town. Guards were posted to watch for any returning outlaws, but most believed the threat had ended with Mitchell's death. The remaining members of his gang who had survived were locked in the town jail, awaiting the arrival of a federal marshal who had been summoned from the nearest large settlement. Henry found himself in the small room behind the church that had once served as the preacher's study. Katherine had insisted he rest there, away from the moans of the wounded in the main sanctuary. He sat on a narrow cot, too wired for sleep despite his exhaustion. The events of the day kept replaying in his mind: the firefight, Mitchell's death, the townspeople's courage. For the first time in years, he had led men into battle for a cause he believed in, and the feeling was both familiar and strange. A soft knock at the door roused him from his thoughts. Katherine entered, carrying a basin of water and clean cloths. "I thought you might want to wash up," she said, setting the basin on a small table. Her own face showed signs of the day's strain, but her eyes remained clear and determined. "Thank you." Henry realized he must look a sight, with dirt and dried blood caking his hands and face. As he dipped a cloth in the water and began cleaning up, Katherine sat in the room's single chair. "How are the wounded?" Henry asked. "Stable for the most part. Dr. Wilson arrived from the next town over. He's tending to the more serious cases." Katherine hesitated. "Carter is asking for you." "He's conscious, but I'll go to him soon," Henry promised, knowing what the unfinished sentence meant. Carter was dying. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of the day settling around them. "You were magnificent today," Katherine finally said. "The way you led those people gave them courage." Henry shook his head. "They already had courage. They just needed someone to show them how to use it." "Don't diminish what you did," Katherine insisted. "God placed you here for this purpose, Henry. I believe that with all my heart." The old reflexive denial rose to Henry's lips, but he held it back. After today, he couldn't so easily dismiss Katherine's perspective. Something had happened in Stillwater, something that went beyond strategy and gunfire. "I should see Carter," he said instead, rising from the cot. Katherine nodded. "I'll come with you." They found Carter in a quiet corner of the church, a blanket drawn up to his chest. His face was ashen, his breathing labored. A young boy of about 7 sat beside him, holding his hand with a bewildered expression. "Tommy," Carter whispered to the boy as Henry and Katherine approached, "this here's the captain I told you about, and the schoolteacher lady." Henry knelt beside the makeshift bed. "How are you holding up, Carter?" "Been better." Carter managed a weak smile. "Doc says I ain't got long." "Internal bleeding," Henry nodded, not offering false hope. "Your boy will be taken care of, you have my word." Carter's eyes filled with tears. "Appreciate that." He turned to Katherine. "Madam, I was wrong about a lot of things. My boy deserves schooling, deserves better than what I gave him." Katherine took his other hand. "Children are resilient, Mr. Carter. With love and guidance, Tommy will thrive." Carter's gaze moved between Henry and Katherine. "You two look right together. Funny, considering how different you are." Henry felt a warmth rise to his face, acutely aware of Katherine beside him. "Rest, Carter. Save your strength." "For what?" Carter smiled faintly. "Listen, Captain, you lost your faith in the war. I never had none to begin with, but seeing what happened today. Maybe there's something to it after all." His eyes shifted to Katherine. Keep praying for him, madam. I think it's working. Katherine squeezed his hand. I will, Mr. Carter, and for you as well. Carter nodded weakly, then turned to his son. Tommy, you mind the captain and Miss Ashford. Learn your letters. Be a better man than your pa. The boy nodded solemnly, his young face struggling to comprehend the gravity of the moment. Yes, Pa. Carter's eyes closed, his breathing growing more labored. Henry motioned for Katherine to take the boy outside. She nodded, gently leading Tommy away while Henry remained with his father. Carter died just before midnight, slipping away quietly with Henry still at his side. His final words were a whispered prayer, surprising both himself and Henry with its sincerity. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself approved of the change in Stillwater. The town began the process of healing, burying the dead, tending the wounded, repairing the damage from the firefight. A town meeting was held in the church to decide next steps. James Henderson, his arm still in a sling, was elected temporary mayor. First order of business, he announced to the gathered townspeople, is to establish law and order. We've sent for a permanent sheriff, but until he arrives, we need volunteers for a town militia. Several hands went up, including Henry's, somewhat to his own surprise. Next, James continued, we need to restart this community properly. That means reopening the church regular, like getting businesses back on their feet, and he smiled at Katherine, establishing a school for our children. A cheer went up at this, louder than Henry would have expected. Clearly, Mitchell's opposition to education had been his own, not the town's. Miss Ashford has agreed to stay on as our schoolteacher, James announced. The old assay office will be converted into a schoolhouse, and classes can begin as soon as it's ready. Katherine stood, acknowledging the applause with a modest nod. I'm honored by your trust, she said, and I promise to work tirelessly to give your children the education they deserve. As the meeting continued, Henry found himself watching Katherine, struck by her quiet confidence and the respect she already commanded from the townspeople. In just days, she had made a place for herself in Stillwater, turning tragedy into opportunity, fear into hope. When the meeting ended, Katherine approached Henry. Walk with me, she asked. They strolled to the edge of town, where a small creek provided a peaceful setting away from the bustle of rebuilding. Katherine's ankle was healing well, though she still walked with a slight limp. So you're staying, Henry said, unsure why the confirmation made his heart lift. Yes, Katherine studied his face. The question is, are you? Henry hadn't allowed himself to consider his own plans beyond ensuring Mitchell was defeated and Katherine was safe. Now, with both accomplished, he faced an uncertain future. I don't know, he admitted. I volunteered for the militia, but that's temporary. Stillwater needs good men, Katherine pointed out, men of principle with leadership skills. I'm not sure I qualify anymore, Henry said wryly. I've spent the last 3 years drinking my way across the West, and the last few days saving a town and protecting its future. Katherine's gaze was direct, challenging. The man I've come to know isn't the broken soul I met in that saloon. He's the man you were always meant to be: brave, compassionate, principled. Henry looked away, uncomfortable with her assessment, yet strangely warmed by it. What about Tommy Carter? I made a promise. We both did, Katherine agreed. He can live with me until more permanent arrangements are made. I've already spoken with Martha Henderson about it. She's willing to help care for him while I'm teaching. Henry nodded, impressed but not surprised by Katherine's practical planning. You've thought of everything. Not everything, Katherine replied softly. Her hand found his, fingers intertwining with gentle pressure. Henry, I know we've only known each other a short time, but it feels like longer, Henry finished for her, suddenly certain of what he wanted to say. Like we've been moving toward each other for years. Katherine's smile lit her entire face. Yes, exactly that. I'm still not the man you deserve, Henry warned. My faith is complicated. I'm not in love with your faith, Henry. I'm in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. The rest will come in time. I'm still praying till you believe, remember. Henry found himself smiling despite the gravity of the moment. How could I forget? He drew her closer. Katherine Ashford, you are the most stubborn, courageous, infuriating woman I've ever met. And, she prompted, eyes twinkling. And I love you for it. The admission felt like setting down a heavy burden he'd carried for years. "I'll stay in Stillwater, not just for the militia or for Tommy, but for you, for us." Her answer was a kiss, gentle at first, then deepening with a passion that surprised them both. When they finally parted, breathless, Henry rested his forehead against hers. "Was that part of your prayer strategy?" he asked, only half joking. Katherine laughed, the sound clear and joyful in the morning air. "God works in mysterious ways, Captain Daniels." 3 months later, the schoolhouse bell rang for the first time in Stillwater's history. 28 children, including Tommy Carter, filed into the newly renovated building, their faces a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Katherine stood at the door, greeting each child by name. She had spent the summer getting to know the families of Stillwater, building trust and enthusiasm for education. The results were evident in the polished desks, the new books, and the slate board mounted on the wall. Henry watched from across the street, where the newly established sheriff's office stood. The badge on his chest still felt strange, but the responsibility it represented felt right. When the federal marshal had asked for a recommendation for a permanent sheriff, the town council had unanimously suggested Henry. After some soul-searching, he had accepted. As the last child entered the schoolhouse, Katherine looked up and caught Henry's eye. Even across the distance, their connection was palpable. She blew him a kiss before following her students inside. Henry touched the Bible in his pocket, not his old, war-worn copy, but a new one Katherine had given him. He had begun reading it again, not with the blind faith of his youth, but with the questioning mind of a man who had seen both the worst and the best of humanity. His faith was returning, not in a flood, but in a steady trickle nurtured by Katherine's patient love, by the rebuilding of Stillwater, by the simple act of helping others. He still had questions, still had doubts, but he had found a peace he'd thought lost forever. That evening, after Katherine had finished organizing her classroom for the next day, Henry walked her home to the small house she now shared with Tommy. The boy had taken to Katherine immediately, his resilient young heart finding security in her steady presence. "How was the first day?" Henry asked as they strolled through the twilight. "Wonderful," Katherine replied, her face glowing with satisfaction. "These children are so eager to learn. Even the older boys who tried to appear disinterested couldn't help themselves when I started teaching about explorers and mountain men." Henry smiled, warmed by her enthusiasm. "And Tommy, he's particularly quick with numbers," Katherine reported proudly. "And he helped the younger children without being asked. He's going to be fine, Henry." They reached the porch of Katherine's house, where light spilled from the windows and the smell of Martha Henderson's cooking wafted from inside. Martha had taken on the role of housekeeper and surrogate grandmother to Tommy, allowing Katherine to focus on teaching while ensuring the boy had proper care. "Will you stay for supper?" Katherine asked. "I'd like that," Henry replied. "But first, there's something I need to say." Katherine's expression grew serious as she noted his formal tone. "What is it?" Henry took her hands in his, heart pounding with nervousness despite his certainty. "Katherine Ashford, these past months have been the most transformative of my life. You came into my world when I was lost, and you showed me the way home, not just to a place, but to myself." Katherine's eyes widened as she began to understand where this was leading. "I'm not fully the man I once was," Henry continued, "and maybe that's for the best. But I am a man who knows what he wants, what he needs." He knelt before her, still holding her hands. "I need you, Katherine. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Katherine's eyes, catching the last light of day. "Yes, Henry, with all my heart, yes." As he rose to embrace her, Henry felt the final pieces of his shattered self coming together, not in the same pattern as before, but in a new configuration that honored both his past and his future. The faith he had lost in the muddy fields of Shiloh was being reborn in the love of a remarkable woman, and the redemptive work of building a community. Later that night, after a celebratory meal with Tommy and Martha, Henry and Katherine sat on the porch swing, planning their future together. "The Reverend from Miller's Creek can perform the ceremony," Katherine was saying. "James mentioned he'll be visiting next month for the town's official incorporation celebration." Henry nodded, his arm around her shoulders. That seems fitting. This town has become part of our story. Our story, Catherine repeated softly. I like the sound of that. It's a good story, Henry agreed. Better than I deserved. Catherine turned to face him. That's not how grace works, Henry. It's never about what we deserve. I'm beginning to understand that, he admitted, slowly. Catherine smiled, her face illuminated by the soft lamplight from inside. You once told me that I was wasting my breath praying for you. I was wrong about many things, Henry acknowledged. Not everything, Catherine said gently. You were right that faith alone isn't enough against bullets. It takes courage, action, sacrifice, but faith gives purpose to those actions, meaning to the sacrifice. Henry considered this. I think my father would have agreed with you. I wish I could have met him, Catherine said, and your brother Jamie. Jamie would have loved you, Henry said, surprised to find he could speak of his brother without the usual stab of pain. He always said I needed someone to challenge me, keep me honest. Smart man, your brother. Catherine's eyes twinkled with mischief. Henry laughed, drawing her closer. I can't promise I'll ever have the simple faith I had before the war. I've seen too much, questioned too deeply. I don't want simple faith from you, Henry. I want authentic faith tested, questioned, and ultimately chosen despite the doubts. Catherine rested her head against his shoulder. Remember what I said that first night, let me pray till you believe. I remember, Henry said softly. Though I think you can stop now. Catherine looked up, surprised. Why is that? Because, Henry said, his voice thick with emotion, I already do believe again. Not in the same way as before, but in a way that feels real, honest, like it can withstand whatever comes next. Catherine's eyes filled with happy tears. Oh, Henry, don't misunderstand, he warned. I still have questions, probably always will. As do I, Catherine assured him. Faith isn't the absence of questions. It's the presence of trust despite them. As night settled fully over Stillwater, they sat together in comfortable silence, watching stars appear in the vast Wyoming sky. Henry reflected on the journey that had brought them together from a chance meeting in a saloon to building a life in a town reborn. He had lost his faith in the blood and chaos of war, unable to reconcile a loving God with the suffering he had witnessed. Yet here, in the aftermath of more violence, he had found not answers but acceptance, not certainty but hope, not the unquestioning belief of youth but the tested faith of experience. And beside him sat the woman who had never stopped believing in him, even when he couldn't believe in himself. The woman who had promised to pray until he believed again. Thank you, he whispered into her hair. For what? Catherine asked. For keeping your promise. She smiled, understanding. Always. 6 months later, on a bright spring morning, Henry Daniels and Katherine Ashford were married in the newly restored church of Stillwater. The entire town turned out for the celebration, packing the pews and spilling onto the grounds outside. Tommy Carter, dressed in his Sunday best, served as ring bearer, his young face solemn with the responsibility. Martha and James Henderson sat in the front row, their own relationship strengthened by the shared work of rebuilding their community. As Catherine walked down the aisle in a simple white dress adorned with wildflowers, Henry felt a profound sense of gratitude. The man who had once lost everything had found a new purpose, a new home, and a love he had never expected. The Reverend, a kind-faced man from Miller's Creek, smiled as he began the ceremony. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls whose journey together began in peril but flourishes in peace. Henry took Catherine's hands in his, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the bitter, faithless man in that saloon to the person he was today, sheriff, mentor to Tommy, respected member of the community, and soon, husband to an extraordinary woman. As they exchanged vows, Henry's voice was clear and certain. The doubts that had plagued him for so long hadn't disappeared entirely, but they had been transformed from barriers into bridges, connections to a deeper understanding of faith, love, and purpose. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the congregation seemed to shake the very foundations of the church. Stillwater, once a town held hostage by fear, had become a community united by hope. At the celebration that followed, tables groaned with food contributed by every household in town. Children played games under the watchful eyes of parents, no longer afraid to let them roam. Music from fiddles and guitars filled the air as couples danced on the green. Henry and Katherine moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes from their neighbors and friends. Tommy stayed close to them, still adjusting to the idea of having a family again, but clearly thriving under their care. As the sun began to set, Henry led Katherine away from the festivities to a quiet spot near the creek where they had first acknowledged their feelings for each other. "Happy?" he asked, though her radiant face had already answered the question. "More than I ever imagined possible," Katherine replied, leaning into his embrace. "When I set out for Stillwater, I thought I was coming to teach children. I never expected to find my heart's home." Henry kissed her softly. "When you walked into that saloon asking for a guide, I thought you were just another fool with a death wish. I never expected you would guide me instead back to life, back to purpose." "Back to faith," Katherine added gently. "Yes," Henry acknowledged, "back to faith." Different than before, but stronger in its way, tested by fire. They stood together, watching the last light fade from the sky, the sounds of celebration drifting from the town. Stillwater had transformed from an outlaw haven to a growing, thriving community with a future full of promise. "What do you think happens next?" Katherine asked, her head resting on Henry's shoulder. "For us or for Stillwater?" "Both," Henry considered the question. "For Stillwater, I see growth, stability, the railroads considering a spur line through here, more families arriving. Maybe a proper courthouse someday. And for us," Katherine prompted. Henry turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "For us, I see a life built day by day, children of our own joining Tommy, a home filled with books and laughter and, yes, prayer." He smiled at the thought. "I see us growing old together, watching this town become what we know it can be." "That sounds perfect," Katherine whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Absolutely perfect." As they returned to the celebration, arm in arm, Henry reflected on the words Katherine had spoken that first night in the lined shack. "Let me pray till you believe." She had kept that promise, not through constant preaching or judgment, but through living her faith daily, through loving him despite his brokenness. And he had found his way back not to blind certainty, but to something more valuable. A faith tempered by experience, strengthened by doubt, and ultimately chosen with eyes wide open. In the years that followed, Stillwater continued to grow and prosper. The school expanded from 1 room to 3 as more families settled in the area. Katherine's reputation as an exceptional teacher spread throughout the territory, bringing visitors eager to observe her methods. Henry served as sheriff for 15 years, mentoring younger men in the principles of fair and just law enforcement. When he finally retired, it was to focus on the orphanage he and Katherine had established for children left parentless by the harsh realities of frontier life. Tommy Carter grew into a fine young man, attending college back east before returning to Stillwater as its first homegrown lawyer. He never forgot his father's final wish for him to become a better man, and he honored that wish through his dedication to justice and community service. Henry and Katherine were blessed with 3 children of their own, 2 daughters, and a son named James, after Henry's brother. Their home became the heart of Stillwater, a place where townspeople gathered for advice, comfort, or simply good conversation. Every evening, without fail, Katherine would pray with Henry beside her. Sometimes he joined her with words of his own. Sometimes he simply held her hand in silent support. But always, he remembered the journey that had brought them together, a journey that began with a lost faith and a woman's simple, powerful promise. "Let me pray till you believe."